Hi, Melita. I will share my screen first for
Okay,
the
great.
introduction, and you will share your screen later.
Anh Lĩnh đổi mic cho anh Lĩnh.
Okay, Lynn, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you very clearly. How are you?
Oh, wonderful. I was worried. We had a tiny little glitch. I'm doing well. And yes, so you will share your screen first, and then we will go to mine.
Yeah,
Uh,
actually, my slides is a very short introduction,
okay.
uh, and then comes your presentation.
Okay.
Um,
Mọi người cũng nghe được anh này mà.
we are waiting for more participants to come. We will start in about 5 minutes.
Okay, let me ask you something. So after your short introduction and your slide, you have my slides as well?
You share your screen later.
Okay, all right, good. All right, I'm just confirming. I don't know why I keep looking at this. I really have to. Oh God, so hard to remember. Not yet.
So are you ready, Melita? Okay, it
Yes,
is
I am.
now
Thank you.
1:30 in Ho Chi Minh City. It is raining outside. I think that more participants will join in a few minutes. However, it is 1:30, so we start the webinar right now. Good
Great.
afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Trần Phước Lĩnh, Head of Department of Research and Project Development at SEAMEO RETRAC, speaking from Ho Chi Minh City, Vietnam. It is my pleasure to welcome you all to today's webinar, Enhancing Information Literacy for Social Sciences and Humanities. First, on behalf of SEAMEO RETRAC, we would like to express our sincere gratitude to American Spaces and the Regional English Language Office, RELO, under the U.S. Mission Vietnam for the support and collaboration in organizing this program. For those of you who may not be familiar with SEAMEO RETRAC, we are a center under the Southeast Asian Ministers of Education Organization, SEAMEO. Our mission is to support Vietnam and SEAMEO member countries in identifying and addressing issues in education. From February to June 2025, SEAMEO RETRAC, in partnership with American Spaces, U.S. Mission Vietnam, is hosting a series of in-person workshops titled Access to American Academia, Information Literacy and Research Skills at the American Center in Ho Chi Minh City. This program is designed for 37 educators and graduate students, equipping them with essential skills in locating, evaluating, and utilizing information for academic research. In addition to these in-person workshops, we are organizing 2 webinars. On February the 28th, many of you joined this webinar several months ago, and June the 13th, which is today, to extend this learning opportunity to a wider audience beyond Ho Chi Minh City. We are thrilled that today's webinar has attracted a large number of participants from Vietnam and across the region. The session is being conducted on Zoom and streamed live on YouTube, allowing us to bring together educators, researchers, and professionals to engage in this important discussion. Now, it is my honor to introduce today's speaker, Ms. Melita Fogle. Before we begin, let me share a brief introduction about her. Melita Fogle is a U.S. Department of State English Language Fellow based in Hanoi. Melita teaches English for academic purposes, English for occupational purposes, English for specific purposes, and English as a medium of instruction, supporting English language programs at the U.S. Embassy Hanoi's American Center. Melita, who was born in San Francisco, California, and raised in the Bay Area, has been a higher education teacher and teacher trainer for over 20 years, both in the U.S. and abroad. Integrated educational technology is a particular interest, and Melita advocates for contextualizing the use of edtech tools like artificial intelligence with learner theories to provide her adult students structure knowledge. To increase interaction during the webinar, you will sometimes see QR codes and or links posted in the chat box for some polls and materials. So please be prepared. Dr. Chang and I will assist Melita as webinar moderators today. We will transfer messages and questions from you to Melita when needed. So whenever we see in the chat box questions or comments, or when we are requested from Melita to provide feedbacks from you, Chang and I will help Melita to do that. So thank you all of you for joining us. And now please welcome Ms. Melita, who will lead today's webinar. So Melita, the next 2 hours and a half is yours.
Wow, 2 hours and a half. Well, it's a great pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me again to complete this series, or at least complete it for me. I'm sure it's ongoing. I have really wanted to share about research skills. And in fact, here at the American Center, we had an academic writing class in order to talk about that very thing. So a lot of what you're going to hear today, some of my students who are also here with me live, I don't know if the participants online know that in this room with me are lots of students who are here in the flesh. But they have also gone through that academic writing class. And so some of this will be familiar, but I hope that today there will be something for everyone. And the purpose of this webinar is to be practical. We're thinking about academia, but we're thinking about it in practical terms. So what can you do? How can you work? What resources are available to you? And I really do just want to say, let me make sure that you can see my screen. Just 1 second. Okay, great, good. We're back to our sharing screen. Because you are here and we are here together, I need to make sure that you understand that there is some possibility that you will be recorded. The screen isn't moving forward. So can we figure out how to get to our next slide? Yeah, there we go. Good. All right. So because we are all here together, some of us, as I said, are here live. It's really important to note that if your photo is taken, you are giving consent by your very presence. And if you are online, if you make a comment in the comment box, you are giving consent to your name and potentially your image being shared. So if you do not wish your name or your image to be shared, then don't comment. But I really hope that you will. I really hope that you will participate, because the way to get the most out of what we're going to do today is to engage and to be actively engaged. So let's go over what we're going to do today. We have just 2 modules, but they're packed. So module 1, we're going to be talking about what is a good research question? What is good research? What does that look like? And we're going to be talking about how to evaluate sources that we find. This is really important because I think a lot of researchers, a lot of students feel very much in the dark about this. And I want to bring some light to how do we start, even with what is a good research question. And then in our second module, after the break, we're going to have a quick break of 5 minutes. And after that break, we're going to continue on with strategies and how to personalize this whole research experience. It's a process, just like writing is a process. You start with an idea and then you start to pre-write, brainstorming, mind mapping, things like that, just to get your ideas going. And then you start to outline and you begin to make it more formal. Well, research is a lot like that. And what we want to do is make it clear, easy to understand, or as easy as possible, and demystify some of this process. And so in that second module, we'll be moving pretty quickly. So at whatever speed you learn, I hope that you are taking notes. I hope that you will be asking questions so that you can get the most out of this. And please don't hesitate to stop and ask questions. It's really important. That's, as an educator, that's important to me to know what you're thinking. I can't read your minds. So without you, I don't know exactly what to clarify. So our learning objectives, well, we've got 4 of them. So these 4-fold learning objectives should be hopefully clear to you by the end. Did we cover this? You can hold me accountable if we don't. So our first learning objective is to focus on what is an answerable research question? What does that look like? And then we want to get into the evaluating process. How do we evaluate our sources? How do we determine whether or not our framework is good, whether it makes sense? And then after the break, in our second module, we need to strategize. Note-taking, for instance, how do we do that? And making sure that our information management works for us. And then hopefully we can personalize what we're doing so that each of us, because, you know, all of us, it's like having a fingerprint, right? My fingerprint is different from yours, and everybody else has a very different kind of fingerprint. So you put your fingerprint on your research, the way you do research, the way you write. It's all you. That's your voice. So let's get into our topic by first finding out who we are as a group. Now, as you see me turning my head, I'm looking at my live audience. This is our first QR code. So take out your phones and tell me who you are. Are you in the social sciences? Are you in the humanities? Are you a teacher, a student, a researcher, something else entirely? That QR code is going to take you to a Google Doc, and please answer the questions so we get an idea of who's with us today. I'll give you a couple of minutes.
For those of you who cannot use the QR code, you can see the link in the chat box, please.
So Chang and Lynn, as soon as we get a few responses, if you could feed them back to me, that would be great. How are we doing, live audience? Are you able to open the Google Doc? Okay, or the Google form, excuse me, Google Forms. Good, all right.
Wow, we have 61 responses already. 62, a lot.
Wow, that's great, that's great. So by and large, who do we have in the room? When I say in the room, I mean, you know, everywhere, wherever you are in your room. So for my live audience, could you raise your hand if you're in the social sciences? Oh, wonderful, wow. How about the humanities? Oh, just a few of you. Okay, more people in the social sciences. Good, all right, great. Raise your hand if you're a student. Raise your hand if you are a teacher. Raise your hand if you're both. Ah, that's awesome. Great, good. If you're a teacher, you're always going to be a student. All right, and do we have anyone with us who is something other than a teacher or a student? Okay, and so are you a researcher? Okay, wonderful. I saw a couple of other hands, so we have some researchers in the room. I'm assuming that that's exactly what's going on online as well. So we've got students, we've got teachers, we've got researchers. Maybe we have administrators who are here who are trying to get a hold of what this all means for their faculties. Great, good. Well, with that information, I hope we will be able to do you some real good today in this webinar. We're going to continue on. Thank you for contributing to that Google form. We'll take a look at it a little bit later. I do think that the results are shared with you, so you as participants get an understanding of who was in the room with you today. So here we are at module 1. We talked about what we're going to do here. So let's do it. What makes effective research? So starting at the base of this triangle, we're talking about clear research questions. We need to be curious about what's happening in the world. We need to be curious about what's going on in academia. And I will touch on this a lot as we continue, but we don't work in a vacuum. We work with ideas, and ideas don't always start with us. So sometimes we are doing things like secondary analysis, where we're looking at what someone else has done and trying to think about what it means for our research and our questions. But if we don't have clear questions, we have to work on that. So we start with a clear question, and then we need to consider the methodology of how to pursue the answers to that question. And I say answers plural because as researchers, I think you probably know you're not going to get one single answer, right? That's not quite how it works. We're trying to get to the truth, and sometimes the truth is a bit messy. So appropriate methodologies to help us get to the truth or to get to a point of being able to answer our question. But we also need to be considerate of ethics. So later in module 2, we will be talking about institutional review boards and making sure that we are considerate of our research subjects and of our data. Keeping that clearly in front of us is important as researchers. We want to make sure that people believe in us, and our credibility is only as strong as our ability to keep our research confined and treat people well during the process. So we need to also consider how to reproduce our methods. So if you're a teacher and a teacher who is also a researcher, fundamentally, you're thinking about how to bring another person along on this journey with you. At least I hope you are. You're mentoring someone who will be able to reproduce your methods, not just because they are learning, but because you want other scholars to understand that your work is viable, meaning it has credibility and it can be used, but only if your methods can be reproduced. And so our last piece of this puzzle, or the last piece of this pyramid, is making sure that we contribute to some overall knowledge. In other words, as I said, we're not working in a vacuum. Research is not something that happens just outside of local knowledge or even global knowledge. It is something that is added to that. So we want to make sure that our contributions matter and that they can be used for other scholars who come behind us. Okay, so what makes I don't like the word bad, what makes a weak research question? What do we do if we have questions, but they're not really relatable or practical for research purposes? It happens. We all start somewhere. So take a look at this slide. Think very carefully about what you've asked in the past, what your questions have been like. If they look like this. They can be answered with a yes or a no. They are pretty broad. They are taking a look at things that are older than, let's say, 10, even 15 years. Or they assume that there's only one answer. Then we're going to have to redirect ourselves to better questions. But let's take a look at some examples of weak questions so that we know and know what to avoid. So here on this slide, we're looking at 3 categories of questions we talked about. So yes, no questions, too broad, lacking specificity. So take a look at these. From psychology, we have this question: is social media bad for teenagers? Okay, well, it could be, right? But is that really what we're trying to find out? Is that what we really want to know? Is democracy good? I mean, first of all, that's not just a yes, no question. That's an overly broad question. It's too big. We have to refine it. We have to think more carefully about what it is we're trying to find out. And from media studies, a question like, do video games cause violence? Not only is that a yes, no question, but it's kind of beside the point, right? So we need to think about our questions carefully. Too broad in scope. From history, we have a question like, what caused World War I? Or from sociology, why is there poverty? In literature, what themes are in Shakespeare's plays? I mean, which play? And there are hundreds, thousands maybe of themes. So what do you really want to know? Again, that might be where you need to start. And then lacking specificity. From anthropology, we have a question like, how do people celebrate weddings? They get married? Or how do people celebrate weddings from education? So thinking about things from these different points of view. But making sure that we refine our questions so that they become analytical questions. Questions that allow us to really dig deep, to find information, or to collect it ourselves through surveys. Questions that are current within the last 10 years. And sometimes I stretch that to 15, depending on the topic. Questions that are specific. They're not broad or overly generalized. Questions that are time-bound, something like as late as 2020 or in the last 5 years. Names resources. So what are the platforms or articles or any texts that were part of that research or should be part of that research to gain a better understanding of how to contextualize? These questions don't ask yes or no, they ask how or why. And really, your research question should show that you know how to contextualize your work within the context or conversation or discourse. You've probably heard that word, discourse, of other scholars. In other words, do you know who's in the room? Have you been reading up on what other people have said about your topic or peripherally about your topic? It's important to remember that, as I said, we're not doing this in a vacuum. And so often our ideas are not necessarily new. We're just adding on to someone else's ideas. But do you know what they are? Have you taken a look at them? Are you thoroughly engaged with that information in a way that shows that you know how to extend your research with theirs? Well, we're going to talk about that a bit more. So here we have this table that helps us see a little bit better from the perspective of what field you might be in, what question you might have asked, what question you could ask, and what's the difference. So let's take a look at this first one in psychology. Is social media bad for teenagers? Well, yes, no, maybe. But what we might really want to know is, how do Instagram's algorithms change in 2023 to 2024? How do Instagram's algorithm changes in 2023, 2024 affect body image perception among teenage girls in urban areas? Can you see how this is more defined? It's a rich question because it gives us a time period or a time frame, specifically from 2023 to 2024. It gives us a population. What's the population? Can anyone tell me? Teenage girls in urban areas. Yeah, so we really want that specificity because we want our research question to engage an audience, to engage a certain set of scholars who are interested in this topic or who are interested in moving this topic forward. And you can do that by making sure that your research question hits on all the areas that maybe have left gaps in previous research. So a specific time frame, a focused population, and examining how, instead of just yes or no. So let's skip down and look at literature for those of you who might be in the humanities. What themes are in Shakespeare's plays? Well, what themes are not in Shakespeare's plays is probably a better question, to be honest. Shakespeare is just, he's in a class all by himself. But maybe what we really want to know is, how do contemporary productions of Hamlet in post-conflict societies reinterpret themes of revenge and justice? Okay, so here's something you should know. A post-conflict society is a society that has gone through war. Yeah, everybody clear on that? So how do we look at Shakespeare from that point of view? And how do we look at that society with these Shakespearean ideas applied to them? So some of you might be familiar with things like feminist theory or Marxist theory, these different ways of looking at things. It's just a viewpoint. It's a way of contextualizing what it is we're learning and why we know it and why we know it to be true. I think I'll be able to scroll down a bit. Yeah, oh, no, I didn't want to go all the way down. Hold on. All right, I just want to go down a little bit. Here we go. So in education, so I know we probably have some people here who are in education. You might have noticed on the last slide, that was not an education question. Are online classes effective? Ay. Well, again, it could be, right? But if we want to know something more specific, we could ask something like this. How do synchronous versus asynchronous online learning formats affect language acquisition for adult ESL learners? Right? Much more specific, focused. We have a specific group in mind, and we can measure the outcomes based on this research question. I have been asked before when I've done visits to universities around North Vietnam, I've been asked, how do I start? Where do I start? I don't even have any ideas. And I think that this is not as problematic as it might seem, because in fact, the world is large and we have information coming at us 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We sometimes wake up to our phone, right? In fact, probably most of us will wake up to it. We're overloaded with information. So it's hard to understand where good ideas come from. and whether those ideas are ours or if we're just borrowing from someone else. Well, let's take a look at this slide so we can figure out whether or not we can apply these to ourselves. Be a global citizen. You want good ideas? Think outside your box. Meet new people. Learn about what goes on in the world from their perspective. Find out more about what goes on in other parts of your community, your larger community. I'm here in North Vietnam. Does anybody know what goes on in the highlands? Do you? I'm not not accusing anyone. I just want you to think about scope. So if you don't have good ideas and it's because you're feeling a little bit contained, perhaps isolated in a particular community, then reach outside of that community. Look for ideas close to home. So it's kind of the opposite of being a global citizen. It's looking at things that directly affect you. Here in North Vietnam, in the fall, I think October or November, we had something called Hurricane Yagi, and it was bad. It affected neighborhoods in North Vietnam, some in terrible ways. Well, that is a very interesting situation. The aftermath of any kind of natural disaster gives us a lot of food for thought. So think about that as something you could consider as a foundation for your ideas. Maybe there have been issues that affect you and your community where you are, and you want to know how to use that to your advantage in your academic work. Leverage scholars. So when I say scholars, I don't necessarily mean your teachers. Your classmates are scholars also, right? So leverage other people, get them talking to you about your ideas. Run your ideas past them. It's really important. I'm going to say it again. We don't do this in a vacuum. So being able to talk to other people about what we think is important. Your feedback is important. Mentor feedback is essential. Use AI and translation tools strategically. Dig deep into social media. And social media doesn't just have to be Facebook or Instagram. You could do things like LinkedIn, right? You're all, really savvy. You can figure this out. Look at what kinds of ongoing conversations are happening through social media. Identify cross-cultural research gaps. Maybe there are natural disasters that are similar to natural disasters that happen to you in your home country that happen in someone else's home country. Maybe you can cross-reference the issues and consider the assignment. This is something I tell my students, well, what are you working on? So I'm not your teacher, but what has your teacher said? What have you been assigned? So if you don't have good ideas, go back to the assignment. Maybe the assignment will give you some indication of what to do and how to start. And practice your passion. I think more than anything else, this is what you can do to get good ideas. Find out what you're good at, what you love, and pursue it. But once you get an idea, and once you start to pursue it, we need to talk about this because I think that it's something that doesn't get discussed widely enough. There is a difference between having an idea that is really your own perspective and an idea that is biased. I don't know how many of you online or how many of you in the room with me have ever heard the word spin. How many of you have heard the word spin? Can you raise your hand? A few people. Okay, so spin is bias. It's when you swerve into information that is meant to prejudice others for a particular purpose. Propaganda is spin. Propaganda is bias. So what is the difference between having a perspective and spin or bias? Well, so think about what's not just important to you, but think about what's important to the people around you. Think about, again, contextualizing your ideas. If they are scholarly, meaning they are set in a context with other scholars who are making their information and their research available, and you are extending their thoughts in some unique or different way, then I think we can start to rule out bias. But when you swerve into strong emotional language or very preset ideas, that moves out of the realm of just having a perspective to having an agenda. And so we really want to be careful of that as researchers. We want to have a perspective, but we want it to be meaningful. So let's think about the difference between having an informed opinion and having a biased one. So take a look at this slide. And for those of you who are online, take a look at this slide. I want to just pause us a little bit and ask you to consider. You don't have to out yourselves if you don't want to, but I think we've all done it to some degree. How many of you feel like you may have in the past been sort of partial or partially biased? Raise your hand. Yeah, I have. It sort of happens naturally, right? So for those of you who are online, I know I can't see your hands, but I'm curious, think about what this means for you and how you can really start to change it. So being precise, measured in your language, being transparent about your assumptions, making sure that people know what your research is based on and who's funding it. So if you're a researcher and you're getting funding, really important. I have shared this with my classes before. I have shared it very specifically with my workplace English class. I've shared it with my academic writing class, and I think even my public speaking class. Years ago in the 1980s, and I'm old, so the 1980s feel, very familiar to me because I grew up in them. But we had this really great campaign, Milk, It Does a Body Good. And it was a campaign that said, if you don't drink milk, you're not going to be strong and healthy. Your teeth are going to rot. You need milk. Well, who funded that? Who do you think funded that whole campaign? It wasn't just people and scientists and doctors who said that milk needed to be part of our diet. Who do you think was behind that? Yeah, the dairy industry. The dairy industry, you need to drink milk. And that cycled through and has come back again because, as you know, we have a lot of people who now don't drink milk or eat animal products. So with veganism comes another wave of dairy, and meat industry people saying, you need meat in your diet, you need dairy in your diet. Well, think about that though. I'm not saying that you need to be vegan. I'm not saying you need to eat meat. I'm not saying any of those things. My point is that your research is based on something and it may be funded by someone. Consider that. We're getting to ethics later, remember? So consider that. So here's a chance for you to take a look at some texts that show either academic perspective or bias and spin. For those of you who may not have access to the QR code, I think the link is being posted in our chat, I hope. And take a look at these two sample texts. Identify language patterns that help you understand the perspective. Evaluate the use of evidence. And then post something to our group discussion that will help us to create a conversation for ourselves. The link's not working. Oh no, that's not great. Not at all. Has anyone been able to make it work? No? Oh, terrific. Oh, wonderful. Well, I don't have, for the participants online, Lynn, Chang, are we getting people who are able to access the document?
Let me check.
Okay, thanks.
For me, it's not available. We are checking. Sorry.
Thank you.
Jen, could you check the link if it's the right one?
The link I posted
Yes.
on the chat box, it works. I'm not sure with the QR code.
Make sure that this is the identifying perspective and spin, not the Google, not the webinar poll number 2, right?
No, this is our first activity and it's not a poll, so it should yield a document that has example texts. So our students online, are they able to see those example texts? Actually, for those of you who are present in the room, you can actually access this webinar online. And if you go to the chat, you will see the document posted there. Anything, Chan, Lynn?
Actually, the QR code doesn't work. We are checking.
No.
Oh, sorry.
No, so my understanding was that the link was actually posted, not the QR code, but the link was actually posted in the chat. Is that not true?
Okay, everyone, could you click the link in the chat box? Melita, I'm just want to check if this is a poll that you have question with 4 options. What is your understanding of perspective compared to spin or bias now? Is that one?
Yes.
Okay. So I can open the link in the chat
No,
box.
no, that's separate. That's separate. So that's a poll, and we haven't gotten to that yet. If we cannot do the activity, that's fine. We will go back just one slide, and I will ask the students who are present or the students who are online to consider in what ways they might have been, and I use this word for me too, guilty of bias or spin. So can I get some hands in the audience? What have you done in the past that may not have been perfectly straightforward as far as your research was concerned? Yes, sir.
Having stated about other ethnic groups or versus.
So for those of you who are online, and even for those of you who in the room might not have heard, this young man said having stereotypes about other ethnicities or races. So not really understanding who people are, but applying ideas to them that may be too broad, too generalized, and flat out wrong. Okay, great. Anyone else? No one? No one's ever had any bias ever? Really? I see somebody smiling like, yeah. Okay, well, great. Let's keep moving on. I'm sorry that our activity did not work for us. I hope that's the last time that happens. But now we are at our interactive poll. So let's see if this QR code works. Now that you've had a chance to consider it, are you more familiar with the concept of perspective versus spin? Yes? A little? I have always been? No, not at all. Where do you stand in this discussion? And for those of you who are online, I hope that you will be able to access the link in the chat. How many of you present in the room have been able to answer the question? Okay, a few of you. Great, good, wonderful. So for our online attendees, where are we? Lynn, have we gotten any responses?
Just a moment, please.
Sure.
Yes, we have 62 responses from participants.
Wow, wow, I'm really pleased. That's great, good. Okay, well, so we've gotten some good responses. I hope we'll be able to take a look at those a bit later, maybe during the break, have a bit more to say about those responses, but let's move on.
Actually, I can give you the result of the responses. So
Okay.
about 23% says, I still don't really understand the concepts. 65%, about 65%, I have a better understanding of academic perspective and spin. And about 11.6%, I already understood those concepts well. Yeah, that's the result of the poll up to now.
Okay, great. Wow. For you 11 percenters, I applaud you. I'm really glad that you have this already in your toolbox. For that 20 to 25% of us who are maybe still a little bit unclear, I hope that we will be able to touch on it a bit more as we continue on, but also you will have access to this webinar asynchronously. So you can go back and review and maybe take a look at some examples. And I'm sorry again that our activity didn't work out, but I do know that it's easy to find out. So using Google Scholar or even AI to help you, you can get more direct answers about what perspective is, what bias or what spin is. So let's continue on. In order for us to really consider how we go from having an idea to putting that idea into action for us when we need to create a research question, we can do this in a very sort of formulaic way. It is possible. So there is this technique called the focus funnel technique. You all know what a funnel is, right? You pour something into a smaller container using this tool that helps us to redirect that. Well, think of that as the stuff we're pouring. Think of it as our ideas. So we start with all of these ideas, and then we try to get them focused enough to give us a question. So we start with a general subject area. Then we move into a focused topic. And hopefully, when we've gotten our focus, we can start to create for ourselves questions about that topic. Let's take a look at what it looks like. So take a look at this page here, this slide. We start with a broad subject like climate change. Then we look very intensely at climate change and we say, well, that's not really what I want to know. I want to know more. So we generalize that topic to climate change policy. And then we narrow our focus to urban climate change adaptation policies. And then we need to think about the specific aspect of our question. What is it that we really want to know? So we think, oh, I've seen these green roofs. People put on their roofs, they put a lot of plants, or their roof is a plant. Maybe there's grass up there instead of, just concrete. I want to know more about that. So green infrastructure, interesting. Green infrastructure in cities, because just typically speaking, we don't really see that in rural areas, right? We don't need it. But in cities, finding green spaces and being able to green the air to sort of suck away some of the pollution or to deal with some of the pollution. Well, yeah, green infrastructure is something that we care about. It's something that is important to us. So green infrastructure in urban climate adaptation. And then we take that and we make a question out of it. How effective are green roof initiatives in reducing urban heat island effects in coastal cities? So first of all, you would have to know that there are scholars out there who've done research on urban heat island effects, right? You would have to know that. You would have to ground yourself in someone else's research and knowledge to be able to figure out what you want to know about urban or green roof infrastructures or green roof initiatives. And you would also need to know that there are scholars who've thought about what's going on in coastal cities. Like, well, for those of you who don't know, I'm in Vietnam. So coastal cities like Da Nang or Nha Trang. Thinking about what that means for those places. This research question helps us to contextualize through meaningful dialogue within the question. So we've got green roof initiatives, we've got urban, and we've got coastal. One thing it's missing, does anybody know what's missing? Anyone online? Anyone in the room? What's missing from this question? Yes. I don't know if anyone online heard that, but what's missing is we don't necessarily have a time period. So we could actually even improve this research question. We would need to know in the early 2020s. Actually, technically, we're still in the early 2020s or mid 2020s. But we could decide on a time period. All right, please let this one work. I hope this one works. I want you to practice your focus funnel technique. Please let this work. Can someone check this QR code? Does it work? Yes or no? Yes?
Yes, as well.
All right, I get all excited about stuff that works. So good. All right, I want you to practice your focus funnel technique. I want you to select a broad topic. Now, remember, this only works if you're selecting things that are meaningful to you. Don't pick something you think I want to hear. I won't hear it anyway. I can't hear the people who are online. So choose something interesting that is meaningful to you, something that you've wanted to know, or something that you're already working on and you've really needed to narrow down and figure out how to make your research question work. So select a broad topic, explore subtopics, apply those limiting factors we talked about, time period, geography, population, or even the methodology you plan to use, and then formulate your question. Yes, I have a question.
In the form, just run the final question with the.
You know what? I don't ever tell my students how to work. So if you want to just sort of brainstorm it out, do that. Yeah. For those of you who are online, however you decide to answer, if you want to do it in kind of bullet point format or it's up to you. I mean, the way you think is the way you think. So use that to your advantage. I'm going to give you a few minutes. Lynn, when we get to some responses that have been posted, we don't need to, I think they're posted anonymously, so we don't need to read anyone's names, but it would be nice to hear what the final questions are for a few of them, if we can.
Actually, we have at least 17 responses, and there is a question like, how do um, how do emotional labor strategies influence burnout and job satisfaction among Malaysian secondary school teachers within 5 to 15 years of experience? Yeah, that's an example.
Oh, oh, wow. I'd like to talk to that person. That's a great question.
Yeah, and another one, somebody choose the broad topic, cultural inclusivity, and then a little bit more narrow, language barrier, and then comes standardized modules and learning materials. And the questions, what are the factors affecting language becomes a barrier in a classroom setting, something like that.
Oh, yes. Well, we would need a population and a time period to help us flesh that out. But that's a great start.
Yeah.
Huh. Yeah.
Another example, the broad topic is climate change. The current subtopic, impact of climate change or on agriculture,
Okay.
and applying limiting factors focus on rice farming in Southeast Asia during the past 5 years. And question, how has climate change affected rice production in Southeast Asia over the past 5 years?
Okay, so that is a great example of one that still needs one more limiting factor. So let's think about farmers or geography, right? So farmers who use a certain kind of fertilizer, or farmers in the highlands. So we would need one more limiting factor for that particular research question, because it's still a bit broad. It is a great question, no doubt. But because we, so you have to know, for those of you who don't know, rice farming is huge here in Vietnam. It is huge. So we would need a bit more to understand where to go with that, to make it a research question that's quite analytical.
Let me go on with another example in the Vietnam context.
Okay.
Learning English. Learning English. Then
Okay.
comes effective techniques for learning English. Then comes number 3, effective techniques for learning English for teenagers in urban area in Ho Chi Minh City. And the question is, most effective techniques for learning English for teenagers in urban area of Ho Chi Minh City. Although the question is not really clear, yeah, but he or she comes with number 4, most effective techniques for learning English for teenagers in urban area of Ho Chi Minh City.
Well, so to do what? To what end? What exactly are these teenagers going to do with the English? And you don't have to say in urban areas, Ho Chi Minh City. So we know Ho Chi Minh City is an urban area. It's the largest city in Vietnam. So you can leave the urban areas part out of that question. But yeah, we would need another limiting factor. So are these teenagers who are trying to enter exchange programs, for instance, or these are newly urban teenagers who have just moved from rural areas into Ho Chi Minh City? So we would need another limiting factor, and we would need to do that in order to really narrow down the focus. So for my live students, do we have anyone who's willing to share their research question from their focus funnel?
Melita, I think we want to share a message from somebody in the chat box, not in the link. From
Okay.
Jennifer, language acquisition,
Okay.
language acquisition among bilingual children. Language acquisition among, I'm sorry, among bilingual children in the 21st century. And then comes the question, how do bilingual children acquire second language as influenced by the social media inputs in the 21st century?
It's great, but still, which children? So in Malaysia, in Tibet, in India, and in what part of India? The Indian subcontinent is humongous, right? So we're talking north, central, south. We need limiting factors. It's a great question, but it is still too broad. So we would need to find out more about who these children are, and particularly where are we going to go with that research? Don't forget that methodology of research is also one of the limiting factors. So through surveys could be part of your question, or through data analysis, secondary data analysis could be part of your question. We're going to get to that, by the way, in module 2. All right, well, let's move on. I think we've got some good questions and we've gotten some good feedback. I'm really pleased. There are some common research challenges and solutions to them. One of the things that make it really difficult to do research is finding time to do it. So time management. And if you're a student, you've got friends, you've got family, you've got chores, you've got errands to run, you've got to cook, you've got to sleep. Time management is huge. And if you're not a student, maybe you're a parent, you've got kids to take care of as well, including all those other things I just said. So, information overload. We talked about that very briefly at the beginning. You don't have good ideas sometimes because you have too many ideas. It's a part of our 21st century living, right? We've got television, we've got radio, we've got our cell phones, we've got information overload. Finding reliable sources. Finding reliable sources seems to be a real issue. People don't necessarily know where to go, where to look, where to start. We're going to talk about that in a second. So hopefully that won't be an issue for much longer. Language barriers and cultural perspectives. These are the things that challenge us when we're trying to do research, especially in cross-cultural contexts. All right, so take a look at the mobile tip. Mobile, it's up to you how you want to pronounce it, tomato, tomato. Take a look at the tip at the bottom of the screen. Evernote, Google Keep, and Vocaroo are all really great at capturing your notes. Vocaroo is really great, by the way. I love it. Super free, very easy, no frills. It is a voice recorder. So if you are on the go and you are worried about losing some idea that you have or some information that you just got, use one of these methods. You can get the app on your phone, use one of these methods to record your thoughts. Don't let them go. They were there for a reason, and hopefully you'll get to use them. So now let's get to that question about reliable sources. eLibrary USA. Sorry for the shameless plug, everyone, but eLibrary USA is wonderful. It is a database that is free for you to use as long as you have signed up and gotten your membership. How many of you in this room, sorry, for those of you who are online, I still have my live audience, so I'm going to ask them very quickly, raise your hands if you have access to eLibrary USA databases. Oh, one student. Oh, two, but both of them are my students. So I would love it if you would take a moment just to write this down or to remember it. Sign up for eLibrary USA. And as long as you are within, throwing distance of an American space, you should be able to go there and either get help from someone from the American spaces, or they have a library like we do here in Hanoi. eLibrary USA is a wonderful place to get academic databases where you get peer-reviewed articles. You can get subject-specific resources or repositories that have specialized collections of information. And for different disciplines, pardon me, you have digital archives and libraries, all contained within eLibrary USA. So, pardon me, so sorry. For those of you who are not familiar with it, get familiar with it. And for those of you who are here in person today, make sure you stop by the American Center before you leave. You also have open access resources like Google Scholar, Core, and directory of open access journals. For those of you who need something on the go, need something quick, maybe you don't want to sign in, you can get those available to you very easily online. And for those of you who are here in person, how have you used eLibrary USA? I see you talking. I just wanted to know whether or not there was something that you wanted to say about eLibrary USA. I hope you will from now on. All right, so good. I think we can put that to rest. Good sources can be found. They are for you at any level of your abilities or any level of your project. If you're a freshman and you're needing research or information, you can use eLibrary USA. If you are a professional researcher and scholar, you can use eLibrary USA, okay? Especially for secondary analysis. All right, let's keep going. But how do we decide if we find something that is not a peer-reviewed journal article, for instance, we find something really interesting and we really want to use it, or we really think about wanting to use it? How do we determine whether or not it's useful? Well, we're going to do the crop test. I'm not pronouncing that in any other way. We're going to do the crop test. Is it current? Is it relevant? Does it have authority or credibility? Is it accurate? And as we talked about earlier, what is its purpose? Who funded it? In the 1980s, not just the dairy industry, but we had doctors and dentists telling us that we had to have breakfast in America. You have to have breakfast. It's important for you to have 3 square meals a day, starting with breakfast. Guess who funded the studies that showed that your body did better if you had breakfast? Guess who funded those studies? Breakfast cereal producers. Again, understand that not all information is good, okay? Or if it's good, it doesn't always have a very clear or transparent background or purpose. So when we do this crop test, we're doing it to make sure that we're using sources that don't take down our credibility, okay? We want to continue to keep our credibility throughout our project or throughout our research. And we don't want to have any reason to be questioned because our information was unreliable in some way. So let's take a look at these two sources. This is an example from sociology. Source number 1, title: Why Uber is destroying immigrant lives in Europe. The truth they don't want you to know. Exclamation point, exclamation point, exclamation point. Author: John Smythe Jones, PhD. Publication: gigeconomytruth.blogspot.com. And it was published sometime in 2015. Source number 2, title: Digital Labor Platforms and Immigrant Economic Integration, a multi-city analysis of income volatility among Uber drivers in European metropolitan areas. Author: Dr. Maria Hernandez Lopez, Professor of Economic Sociology, University of Amsterdam. Publication: European Journal of Work and Employment Studies, Volume 45, Issue 3, pages 234 to 258. Published March 2024. And of course, the date of, oh God, what is that I? This date, obviously important, whether or not it was entered into a journal. Take a look at these two sources. Which one would you use in your research? That's easy peasy, lemon squeezy, but why? Why source 2?
Well, that's offer is there is in a relevant area that she's doing studying.
Okay, but they're both PhDs.
But the first one, we don't know if he's teaching in the two.
Do we even know if John Smythe Jones is an actual PhD, full stop?
That's good. I'm not sure about identification.
That's the point. We don't actually even know. You could put anything at the back of your name. I could. I could put PhD at the back of my name right now. It wouldn't make it true. So we don't know. Why is source 2 more reliable?
But vacation, it's approved or like it's been like peer reviewed.
Okay, wonderful, peer reviewed. It's in a publication in which other scholars have looked at it and determined that it belongs among their research. It's contextualized as something that belongs in the discourse. Okay, great. Anything else that makes source 2 something we would use?
Jennifer says option 2, the article came from a journal and it has a DOI.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Jennifer. Absolutely. Yes. All right. Well, now that we've taken a look at these two sources, let's take a look at some comparison. What's the difference in language and tone? Those of you who are online, drop a comment in the chat. What's the difference between language and tone between source 1 and source 2? I can go back. What's the difference between language and tone? What about the quality of evidence? What about the quality of evidence, the differences between the two? What do you think? Again, for those of you who are online, drop a comment in the chat. Transparency, meaning who's responsible for this? And usefulness, is it useful? What do you think? Are we getting any comments in the chat?
Mika says source 2 is formal, source 1 is clickbaity and aggressive.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Well, we're getting close to our break. I forgot to turn on my timer, so I think we might have gone over our time. Let's get to our break because I want you to have a moment of refreshment, a moment to move around, maybe go, come back. So let's take a quick look at questions to ask when you're evaluating sources. Who wrote it? When was it written? Where is it published? What evidence is used? And why was it written? These are questions you should be asking yourself to determine whether or not your source is useful to you. All right, 5 minutes only.
Melita, could you turn back to that slide and keep that? Maybe
Sure.
yeah, people may need that. I think so.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Okay, I think we can come back. And John and Lynn, are we back? All right, for my live audience, can I get everyone to resume their seats? Great, and am I at the door? Come on. All right, so.
All right.
Great, good. I hope everyone is back. I hope you had a little break. I hope you were able to stretch your legs. Welcome to module 2. Now, hopefully this module will bring you some more practical resources to consider. We have to go through this quite quickly though. So it's going to feel a bit like a whirlwind, and it's a lot of information. For those of you who are online, you have the comfort of home or your office to sort of breathe. If you need to take a breather, don't worry, I will not be offended. It's quite a bit, but we're going to get through it. And I'm looking forward to your questions and comments. Please, that's the best way for this to work, is if you engage actively and hold me accountable. If there is something that you really just need to know more about, if we don't have time now, save your question for the end and I will try to answer it. All right, let's get started. So one of the things that I often hear students say, or teachers that I work with through professional development say, is we can't afford that. Well, there are lots of ways to get access to tools that are useful to you without paying for them. So let's talk about a few of those ways to get access to things that you need in order to do the work that is important to you or to your students, and to be comfortable with those tools. So first is institutional access. Let's start with going to your university library. It's not that difficult. If you are engaged in any kind of research through a university, your university ought to have some resources for you of some kind. So start there. And for me, it's no brainer. I will always go to the library. That's my first reference point, is going to the library. So make sure that if your university has subscriptions, get those periodicals when they're hot off the press. Make sure that you have access to them so that you're current. Then there are open access alternatives. So look for things that don't have a paywall, articles that are absolutely peer-reviewed, presentable, credible. And we already talked about this, but go to eLibrary USA. eLibrary USA has all of these things. So even if your university, for whatever reason, doesn't have the databases that are useful to you in your field or in the kind of study that you are interested in, you have eLibrary USA as a great backup. Contact authors directly. I did this. Years ago, I applied for a Fulbright. I didn't get it. That's okay. I got to do something else that was far more interesting for me in my life at that time. But when I was applying for my Fulbright, there was a particular scholar whose work was meaningful to the direction I was taking with my research question. I was surprised, not even surprised, you could have knocked me over with a feather. It's an idiom, an expression that means I was so surprised when he got in touch with me and he said, I would love to work with you. I think your research question is great. I was surprised mostly because, generally speaking, scholars don't necessarily work with you if you're not representative of their institution. So in other words, if you go to the university that they are associated with, they're probably going to be more likely to help you. I was not associated with his university at all. He was in New York and I was in California. It was wonderful. He talked with me about the meanings of his work, and it was folklore. And it was just a really great masterclass in understanding some ideas. And I think that if you take the time to look for the authors of the work that you are interested in and want to use, it's more meaningful to actually have a conversation with the author. And then document sharing platforms. Find document sharing platforms like ResearchGate, academia.edu, and anything that your institution or your university provides. And of course, as I said, start with the library. The library is probably going to be the first best place for you to start. All right, so now that we've gotten that out of the way, and you're not really worried about paying for access to things, at least I hope you're not, we can move on. I don't know how many of you feel strongly about note-taking. It is absolutely something I do all the time. For those of you who know me as a teacher, but those of you who also just know me as a person, sorry. Excuse me. I carry a notebook everywhere. I write everything down. I know it's really analog, it's old school, but I take notes at night. I keep a notebook by my bedside. There's one on my dining table. There's one on my desk. I'm not kidding. Because if I have ideas, I don't want to lose them. I write them down immediately. So my thought to you is keep a notebook, keep one handy. But there are ways of taking notes that could be really useful to you as scholars, as researchers, as students. Remember, whatever level or platform you feel you're on at this point, whether you're a freshman or whether you're a professional researcher, note-taking is important. So the Cornell method is quite formal. It's a very structured way of taking notes. The outline method, it's just a way for you to put your ideas in kind of logical progression. And then mind mapping. I love mind mapping. Mind mapping is my favorite way of taking notes or doing pre-writing. It's a way for me to just connect ideas so that I know where I'm going with things. It also helps me to think about connotation and denotation. For those of you who are not familiar with those concepts, denotation is the dictionary definition of a word. But connotation is the emotional definition, the social or cultural definition of a word. So for instance, a word like home, the denotation is the place where you live. The connotation is warmth, love, security. So it's really important for us to think about words and their meanings, and this is why we take notes. If we're not taking notes in a useful or practical way, our research really kind of doesn't go anywhere. And if we don't know what the words mean and why we're using them, we don't have a way of extending our research out to an audience that cares about what we're talking about. So here are some effective note-taking strategies. Be selective. Focus on relevant information rather than trying to capture everything. Write down direct quotes or quotations from authors or scholars whose work is meaningful to yours. Don't forget to add your own thoughts. In our pursuit of information, secondary analysis, right? In our pursuit of information, we often forget that we are important. We started this whole search for information, right? So add your ideas to theirs. Maybe you don't agree with everything they have to say. Well, mark that. Find a way to acknowledge that. And then make sure you record the sources that you get. Here are a few digital note-taking tools. If you are not familiar with them, get familiar with them. They're quite good. So there's Google Keep. It's part of the Google suite of products. And as you already know, they're free. So Google Keep, Evernote, Notability, and Zotero, these last three, there are levels. So there's a free level and then there's the paid level. If I were you, I would just start with the very free thing, right? Like Google Keep, it's free. If for some reason you don't have access to that, you might have OneNote. If you have Microsoft, the suite of Microsoft products, there's OneNote. Or you can just use Cloud Drive, what's OneDrive or Box or, oh gosh, there's so many. You can use cloud storage and use that as a note-taking tool. Most of them, as I said, are free, at least to a certain point.
Melita, there is a question in the chat box. Would you please share any tips for identifying the core information or key points when you read or hear a long document?
Ooh, what a great question. Thank you for asking that. So the first thing to do is look to see whether or not the document has its own sections. So often an article, a peer-reviewed journal article, those are quite long sometimes, 20 pages or more. Look for the segments or the sections. Take a look at the titles of those sections. And then do yourself a favor and read the first sentence or first and second sentence in each paragraph. That's all you need to do, at least to start. So you jot down the notes from those first sentences in those paragraphs to get an idea of what's going on in that particular article. That's something that I do. I don't know if that will work for everyone, but when you have a long article to read, it's daunting, it's difficult. So taking a look at the natural segmentation of the article and taking a look at each paragraph in each segment is going to be a way for you to get an overview of what that whole article is about. I hope that helps. So now we're at our third interactive poll. What is your favorite way to take notes? Why does that method work for you? And would you try another method? Take out your phones. Let's, for those of you who are online, check the chat box for the link and let's hear from you. What's your favorite way to take notes? We don't all do it the same way. As I said when we started, it's like all the ways we do research is like having a fingerprint. It's unique. And we don't all do things the same way. So my method may not work for you. Your method may not work for me, but I'm curious what it is. And the reason why we do this, we share ideas, is because somebody may be out there searching for something that works for them. So let them know what you do. None. None.
So there are some responses like mind mapping, cluttering with Keep Notes, and decluttering in Notion, and then mind mapping, jot
Okay.
down. For doing research, we write the author name, year, brief of abstract, and the link in a table. Somebody says sometimes Cornell sometimes just write books. I would like to try mind mapping, but I'm not good at organizing my mind.
Okay.
Some says I like outlining because it allows me to arrange my ideas. I can easily be modified in case I have new ideas or subtopics and add along the process.
Interesting. Can we go back to the person who said that mind mapping might be a little difficult? It is. It's a jumble of ideas. I think it's a good way just to get your ideas out, but you go from mind mapping to another type of information management. So you can go from mind mapping to outlining. So you don't have to stay in the mind map.
I think this one is interesting by writing the most important keywords. I can remember the details easily.
Mhm, mhm.
Some says Google Keep.
Well, good. Yeah.
Interesting.
Can the person who said that they do keywords say more? I'm curious. So you go through the article and you just look for keywords, or
Yeah, I'm just reading the responses in the Google form.
oh sure, yeah, okay. I'm just so curious. There's nothing wrong with what that person said. I'm just really curious. I'm always curious about the ways people you take and use information.
This is short. I prefer the outline method.
Okay, yeah, yeah, a lot of people do, actually. It feels
Yeah.
very logical. Yeah. Okay. All right, well, so that we don't run out of time, I don't think we will, but just so we don't run out of time, let's keep going. I'm curious to hear the rest of the responses and see them, and I'm looking forward to doing that. But we need to talk about something very quickly, something that we don't always talk about, but it is exceptionally, essentially important when it comes to enhancing research skills. So, plagiarism. If you do not quote a source, you put something in your research that is taken from someone else's work. If you do not quote that source, even through paraphrasing, you are plagiarizing, you are stealing that person's work. And I don't like to use that phrase stealing. I mean, you're borrowing it because it's good and because it's useful, but without citation, without giving credit to the person or persons for whom or to whom it belongs, you are taking someone else's work. And so we don't really want to do that. Here's something else you might not know. You can plagiarize yourself. So if you have done work in the past that you are particularly proud of and you are responsible for, but you use it in a new set of work without citing yourself, you are literally plagiarizing yourself. So it is quite hard to understand how that could happen, but it is something that does happen. Plagiarism is real. Some people do it on purpose, but most of us do it accidentally. So let's think about how we can not do it at all. So we need to figure out how to use direct quotations in the right way, and we need to figure out how to paraphrase in the right way. So proper attribution. Attribution means you attribute or give credit to the person or persons who are responsible for the information that you have cited. You need to do direct quotation, meaning use quotation marks around information that the person has provided. You can paraphrase, take their words and sort of make them your own and restate those words. You can summarize. So you're not changing their words to help you develop your own voice. You're keeping their words, but you're just shortening what they've said. You're summarizing what they've said. And then, of course, you cite. So in-text citation is when you put the author's name and the page number or how it was. So citation is another one of those things. We don't actually get into citation very specifically, but you have Chicago style, you have MLA, you have APA. Ooh, I'm forgetting one. Does anybody know which one I'm forgetting? Chicago, APA, MLA? Which one? Howard. Howard? Harvard. No, I don't think Harvard has its own citation style. Maybe those are, no, there's a fourth one. So there's APA, MLA, Chicago. What am I missing? Does anybody know? Anyone in the chat? Tell me which one am I missing? Each of these citation styles or formats uses a different way of in-text citation and then the references at the end of the paper. So in-text citation is going to be referred to at the end of the paper. Does anybody know in my online audience or in my live audience, does anybody know the number of sources you should have for scholarly work? Does anybody know? Our scholars who are here? No? You should have, in order for your work to be deemed credible, do you know how many sources you should include in your research? Minimum. No. It is a great guess. Not 20. More than 10.
15.
Who said 12? Yeah, it's about a dozen. A dozen. So it is really important that those dozens of sources that you have included get cited correctly. Either in text or reference at the end or both. All right, so paraphrasing versus quoting. When to do it? When should you quote? Anyone? Okay, well, both of those do that. Both of them support your own ideas. But when do you use a direct quote and when do you paraphrase? It's not rocket science. I don't want you to try to figure it out. You can read from the slide if you like. When should you quote? Yes.
If like the author have like very specific terms that you can't really paraphrase.
Yes.
Use everything.
Yes, I'm going to repeat what you said.
Yeah.
I am going to quote you.
Yeah.
So one of the people in my in-person audience said, when the author has said something so specific that you really don't want to mess with it, you want to keep it the way it was, that's when you use a direct quotation. Okay, and I agree with you 100%. When do you paraphrase? Say it again louder.
I love what we're talking about.
Oh, no, tell me about quoting then. That's okay.
I think it's when you are insert from or a
Oh, like you're talking about a legal precedent? Did you say a legal document? Yeah. Sure. Yes, if you're analyzing a legal document, you're looking at it and you're thinking about what's in the text. If there's a precedent that is set and you want to keep it, you should use a direct quotation. But if you just want to talk about it and talk about its meaning or analyze it, you can paraphrase. Yeah. All right. So direct quotation and paraphrasing, that's something you get used to the more you write. You start to get a feel for it. Basically, you don't want your whole paper to be paraphrasing. You don't want your whole paper to be direct quotations. You want a combination of the two so that your paper, your analysis flows and is interesting. If you're reading quote after quote after quote, that's not interesting. If I'm only reading paraphrase, then why did you bother to get these scholars into your paper in the first place, right? We want to hear from them a little bit, and then we want to hear what you have to say about what they said. So, how do we do research? There's two main ways to do research, and I call this people and numbers. Qualitative research approaches are the people. Interviewing, focus groups, case studies, ethnographic research, field observations, document and content analysis. These are the ways in which you look at information that still feels directly related to and connected to people. Qualitative research approaches. Just a show of hands for those who are here in my live audience, and any comments in the chat, please. How many of you have done an interview with someone? Okay, great, good. And then you wrote about it later? Yeah? Okay, good, great. So you're already well on your way to doing qualitative research. All right, well then there is, if we have qualitative, what do you think the other one is? Quantitative. And this is what we call, well, I call it numbers. So it's sort of comparable to qualitative in that you're looking at things from a kind of logical, reasonable perspective. We're looking at numbers, usually. So surveys and questionnaires, usually large data samples that we can look for patterns in, experimental designs, secondary data analysis. I've said that a lot tonight, and basic statistical concepts. These are the ways in which we quantify what the data is, what it means in some ways. Okay, so qualitative, quantitative. How many of you have done a survey? Great. And how many of you use the results of that survey in something that you wrote about? Okay, good. I mean, that's kind of the point of having done a survey, is that you use that information to talk about some idea or some hypothesis or theory that you have. So here are the components of a research plan. These are the main components. Now, everybody's research takes very different turns, has very different components or elements, but these are kind of four basic elements. You need a timeline. You need to think about what's going to happen. Some research takes a week, some research takes years. What's your timeline? You need to think about what that looks like in relation to the next part, which is your budget. Well, if your budget only stretches so far, your research isn't going to take years. It may take months. Also, think about resources as human as well. Not just the money it's going to take to conduct your research, but the human resources. Maybe you're not the only person who can do the interviews. So who are you going to get to do interviews for you? Who are you going to get to compile that interview data? It could be 2 or 3 different people. So your resources are, and your allocation of resources are important. Research timeline, budget allocation, milestones. Sometimes you have to report, well, not sometimes, pretty much all the time, you have to report your research to someone. Well, you have to report to them the milestones, the places in which your research has made essential progress, important progress, it has come to certain stopping points. And in fact, sometimes you may not reach your final milestone. You may run out of money. You may run out of resources of other kinds. You may not need to go any further. But making sure that you pay attention to the milestones in your research is important. And finally, planning for upsets. This is contingency planning. Anyone here ever got married? Anyone in the room married? Okay, so when you were planning your wedding, for those of you who are online, when you're planning your wedding, you built in contingencies. What happens if the flowers don't show up? What happens if the food is, not here at the right time? Contingencies. I have alternative plans if something doesn't go exactly the way I want it to. So now that we've looked at the 4 general ways in which to move forward with our research, let's think about what resources are available. I'm looking around the room and I'm looking into the camera at my audience online. We don't always get everything that we need to do what we'd like to be able to do. Sometimes we don't have the funding. Sometimes we don't have the time. Sometimes we don't have access to the people we need to have access to for many reasons. Some researchers need access to children. Well, that is a whole level of ethical consideration and institutional review board approval that you might not get. And sometimes you're the sole or solo researcher. You may not have help. So these are all limiting your ability to do what you need to do. So how do we work with these things? Well, here's a strategy to adapt. If you have limited funding, use free tools, smaller sample sizes, and rely on secondary analysis or secondary data analysis. In other words, look at what other researchers or scholars have done. Use that to formulate the basis of your work. You might not be able to build on your own work because you just don't have the means to do it. That's okay. Time restrictions. Narrow the scope of your project. Right? Instead of interviewing 1,000 people, you might only be able to interview 50. That's okay. Focus on specific aspects. You can't do urban and rural. Let's just focus on rural. And of course, existing data sets. Information is always out there. We have this expression in the US, you might have heard, there's nothing new under the sun. In other words, you'll find it. If you're looking for it, you're likely to find it. It may not be perfectly what you want. It may not be exactly what you need, but it will be just close enough to be able to be useful to you. And if you have limited access, find remote research methods, digital alternatives, and proxy measures. Maybe go ask a friend to do the research for you or to do the interviews for you if you can't make it to the rural countryside. And if you're a solo researcher, get some help. Find collaborative networks. I guarantee if you ask for help and it's interesting enough, somebody will want to help you. It happens. And use research assistants. Maybe you have to pay them. And if you don't have the means to do that, it's like in the US, when we need someone to help us move from one apartment to the next, we just offer them pizza. Oh. Offer to buy them dinner. It depends on what you need them to do, but find a way to get some help and use automated tools. So at the bottom of the screen, you have your mobile tip or mobile tip, tomato, tomato. You can use Trello or Asana as tracking methods for your progress. And now we're at our 4th interactive poll. This means we're actually getting close to the end. I didn't realize we would be on time this time. I'm actually really happy about that. So, because I'm hoping that there'll be lots of questions in the chat, and hopefully lots of questions among the live audience. But which part of the research process do you anticipate being the most challenging for you? And which part of the process do you anticipate going smoothly? So this is an MCQ, a multiple choice question. Actually, both of them are multiple choice questions. Go ahead and find the Google Doc or the Google form and answer those two questions. Lynn, have we gotten any responses online yet?
One moment, please.
Sure.
Because you didn't share the editing, right, for me, so I cannot see the responses.
I didn't? Oh, I'm so sorry about that. This is one of the only ones that I did that.
Yep.
Oh, that's annoying. I will make sure I will make sure that afterwards I will do that. But Chang, can you see results or responses?
I couldn't get the editing right as well, the same as Mr. Lin.
Oh, how odd. All right, well, I feel bad about that. So let me just ask my live audience. Let's keep it moving. Let's ask the live audience. Which part of the research process do you anticipate being the most challenging? Anyone? Yes.
I feel that type of planning contingency most challenging.
Planning contingencies. Yeah, thinking about what could go wrong is hard, right? It could be anything. And planning for what could go wrong is really difficult. It's complex. Yeah. I think contingency planning for me as well, but not necessarily financial contingency planning, but more like human resources. Like, who could I get to help me with this if I needed it? Anyone else?
Kimberly said drafting the timeline.
One more time, Kimberly said.
Kimberly said drafting the line time is challenging.
Okay, so creating the timeline, making sure that you look far enough ahead to consider where you're going to be. Yeah, that's actually quite challenging. It requires you to really be thoughtful about your project, and your research, and kind of know exactly, I mean, not to every detail, but know more about who you're going to meet with and what you're going to do and how long that could take. Yeah, timelines are not easy either. I agree with you, Kimberly. Anyone else?
In the thing that they show the numbers.
Yes?
So it looks like the planning was the most challenging one.
The most challenging. Okay.
And the easy one, drafting the timeline. 63%.
Okay, all right. So it looks like the timeline, creating a timeline and making sure that we've got one is something that people feel really like they've got that together. But as you move through, it probably gets potentially more challenging. Okay. So let's take a look. This is our last, hard topic for this particular webinar. And like plagiarism, it is an essential topic. Most people think that researchers just go out and do whatever they want and they just get, stuff done, and it's great. And sometimes we see movies of people who have been backpacking into, far out communities or talking to indigenous people, and oh, isn't that one? Well, it's a little bit more detailed than that. You don't just get to trek out to, rural villages and talk to people and ask them questions, snap pictures of them, or use their name willy-nilly. You don't get to do that. There are ethics to research. And if you don't follow ethical guidelines, you could actually be.
Attention is offered, attention is offered. This is a local campus. The following is an absolute concept actually required eyewitness, no actually required to this audio text.
Sorry.
Xin mọi người chú ý về thái độ bảo vệ xung quanh. Sau đây chúng tôi sẽ thực hiện thống trong hoạt động. Mọi người không cần phải hành động. Tôi nhắc lại không cần hành động. Đây chỉ là thực hiện thống.
Well, we're going to have a test of the security
First
system.
one, if you hear is an active cover. Trong hoạt động tiên rất tìm nơi như vậy.
Yeah.
Sorry, everyone. There might be some problems at American Center Hanoi. Please stay. We'll contact Melita to see what happens there. Thank you. Perhaps there is a security check at American Center Hanoi. So thank you for your patience. Melita will be right back.
Well, I'm sorry to everyone online. Yeah, we had an emergency drill and it took about 4 minutes and I appreciate your patience. Had no idea that was going to happen. So let's let's move on with our discussion about ethics. Really important to understand that when researchers go out, especially when they have human subjects, they are bound by guidelines that they really must adhere to. Before our interruption, I was saying that you can be censured as a scholar, meaning you can be disciplined if you do not go through the guidelines and stick by them as you continue through your research process. It's really important that you understand this, particularly if your research subjects are children. But anyone, if you are using any kind of human research trial or interviews or subjects of any kind, you really must be very careful. But even if you're not talking to or needing to use people in your research, your numbers need to be accurate. You cannot, we have this expression, cut corners. When you cut corners, it sounds like a good thing to do, to take a shortcut because you need to meaningfully get somewhere quicker, but that's not meaningful. That's actually harming yourself and your research when you cut corners. So make sure that you are committed to the process and you start by getting approval from institutional review boards and ethics committees so that you are not in a position of having to explain why your research did something it shouldn't have done. So for those of you who may not be familiar with IRBs, institutional review boards, you can get familiar with them again through your libraries. I love libraries. Libraries are here to save us, really. So if you don't understand what to do with regard to getting help with human subjects, start with your library. Ask your library for IRB template applications. They should have those. And if they don't, you can go online. You could try Google Scholar, for instance. It's really important that you understand that the things that you need are available to you. They're not hidden from you. Nobody wants you to do the wrong thing. So, ethics in your research should be strongly valued and strongly considered and put into your planning. So when you're thinking about the timeline, I think we had something like 63% of people thought the timeline was probably the least challenging or the part of the process that would go smoothly. Well, it won't go smoothly if you don't add ethics considerations and getting approval from the institutional review boards or ethics committees that govern your research. And when I say govern, it's like the umbrella of support that you get usually from your institution, from your university. So for those of you who are not associated or affiliated with a university, you are probably doing your research under the umbrella of some sort of organization. Well, they also will need to help you figure out how to get ethics committee approval or IRB approval. Either way, whether you are part of an institution or whether you are a committed but contracted researcher, you need to make sure that you position yourself to be credible. And that cannot happen if you do not get ethics approval. Okay? I'm very serious about that. That is, you don't just get to do whatever you want because you could hurt people in the process. So, once you get your research findings, you need to think about what to do with them. All those notes that you took, all that data you have at your disposal. Reports, videos, interviews, what do you do with it? So think about what's important to you. I think I said that at the beginning. What is important to you? It starts with your research question. What is important to you? Think about that at the end when you start to structure your research, when you start to think about publication. What are your main approaches? How will you organize? Are you going to do it chronologically or thematically? How will you outline the sections? Well, we usually have this kind of raw structure of beginning, middle, and end. That may not necessarily work for your project. So introduction, methods, results, discussion, and conclusion, that might work. And you need this ratio or balance of the information you extracted from others and what you think it means. So evidence to analysis ratio. You don't just collect information and throw it into a report. That does nothing for anyone. And it doesn't help you to remain contextually a part of the conversation or the discourse. You need to talk about what that evidence means. So analyzing it is deeply important. And finally, your sources. I think we talked about this. Your minimum integration of sources that you should have is about 12. You can have hundreds, but if you're going to be a researcher or a scholar who really wants to be taken seriously, you need about a dozen sources to really keep your work viable and to keep it really focused in the conversation on your particular topic or within your particular discipline. I don't know if that's clear or not, but we're coming up on the time for you to ask questions. I think I have just one more slide and then we'll be at our ending point. Yeah. Yeah, I always like to throw this in because it's kind of important. You've done a lot. You've done a ton of research. Maybe it took you months, maybe it took you years, but you have to write about it. And if this is for a PhD, yeah, thesis writing is it's a lot. So think about the ways you can work and keep working. You don't want to lose momentum. So free writing, something very specifically called the Pomodoro method, scaffolding your approach, and getting feedback from peer scholars or mentors or just friends, people who aren't even associated with your work, because sometimes a fresh pair of eyes is exactly what you need. And Google Docs, IA Writer, these are ways of capturing your ideas. So the mobile tip at the bottom of the slide, hopefully useful to you, practical for you, and will give you some structure. That's it. I can't believe I have talked for 2.5 hours and you listened to me. The people in the room are giggling. You're troopers. In fact, you are superhuman. But now is your turn. We have just 15 minutes left and I want to use them well. So ask me questions. And that goes for you online. Please ask me questions. This is why we're all here. We're part of a larger conversation. If there's something that I didn't cover well, or I covered too quickly, or maybe there's something I didn't cover at all that you were curious about, please ask.
Yeah, I want to ask about the writing process. The procedures before we write, we have to read the articles of the journal first, right?
Mm-hmm.
I talked about the reading process. We have to read critically.
Mm-hmm.
So I have some like troubles when we read how to read the journal critically.
Mm-hmm.
And we have to make questions about the part of it. Yeah, how to, and then we generate the arguments from that. Yeah, I think it's quite challenging to me.
Okay, well, we're not gonna make you repeat your
Melita,
question.
could you please summarize the question before you answer? Thank you.
Absolutely, I was, yes, absolutely, was planning to do that. So, one of the live audience participants was saying, we get to the end and we have to read and do a lot of reading, and how do I summarize what I've read and what else?
Read critically,
Read critically,
yes,
that's,
and evaluate the reading.
and evaluate the reading. So critical reading of secondary source material that is important to your own research. Yeah. So I'm going to say something and you might not like it. Hopefully it will resonate with you. This is important. You don't start reading when you have to do a research project. You read all the time. So you get used to the idea of how to look at information, synthesize it, analyze it, summarize it. You are constantly in the habit of reading. One of the things that I said to my workplace English students, and I have one here in the room, is you must always be ready. So that's a first part of my answer is you don't just start reading for a research project. That's daunting. You must always be in the habit of reading. The second thing is one of the things that I said before, and that is take the reading in chunks. You're not going to read one article that's 30, 40 pages long in one sitting. Read a bit at a time. Remember that most articles are segmented. They have different pieces. So take it like that. Take a piece at a time. Take notes on each piece or on each segment. And make sure that you add your ideas to each of those segments so that when you get to the end, you have a kind of roadmap of your own thoughts attached to what's in the article. Does that make sense? Okay. Any other questions? Any other issues? It could be anything. It doesn't necessarily even have to be specifically about our webinar today.
I have a question regarding the research methods. You said that the survey questionnaire belongs to a quantitative method. But in case in a questionnaire, we have both those open and closed question and also qualitative questions for the answer. So in that case, what's the method?
So the question is about using surveys or questionnaires. Are they qualitative or quantitative? And technically, they're both. And you're looking at information given to you by people. So when I say quantitative is people and qualitative is, qualitative is people and quantitative is numbers, you're doing both. The information that you're getting from that survey or from that interview is going to be the quantitative, right? The numbers of people that respond, the number of responses that say this. That's what we have actually from our Google Forms. 63% of people think that it is easier to start with a timeline, that kind of thing. So there are people behind those statistics, but your methodology, the choice of methodology really has more to do with how much access you have to your subjects. So you don't have to do interviews if you can do just a general survey, right? Interviews are a little bit more intimate, I would say, personal, yeah. But a survey is a little less personal. How many people think blah, 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 right? So it depends on what are the goals of your research? What outcomes do you want for your research? So the choice to do quantitative versus qualitative is up to you. It's, yeah.
information.
Sure. I hope that was
Melita,
helpful.
there is a very interesting question from Jennifer in the chat box. What's
Sure.
your stand about the use of AI in writing research, particularly
Oh.
data analysis and interpretation?
Oh, Jennifer, you have the best questions. So I'm going to give you the teacher response, and it's a very real response because I'm a real person. I just happen to be a teacher, but listen carefully. You should always write first. You should always write first. Whatever you have to say is always going to be more important than what AI interprets for you. So what I do when I need to use AI is that I do my writing and then I run it past AI for particular purposes. Hey, can you look for all the keywords in what I wrote? Can you look for all the instances of, this thing? That's what you use AI for. You use AI as a tool to help you get to what you need to do so you don't have to do it manually. But you're going to use AI, and most people do. Just remember, AI is an algorithm. It's machine learning. It's not something that understands your goal. It's not something that understands that what the outcome of your research is meant to do or meant to be to other people within the discourse, within the conversation. So in order for AI to be of use to you, you need to contextualize it and you have to close the feedback loop. So you start with your work, you ask AI to analyze it, and then you feed back to AI what it analyzed and say to it, prompt it to explain its response. That's closing the feedback loop. And if you use it in that way, I think that it can actually enrich your work. But if you don't use it in that way, if you just get it to write for you, it's not going to understand the human side of your research. It's not going to understand the critical meaning for your community or for the population that you've chosen to do research within. So that's my answer. AI is incredibly important to us these days. It really is, and I will never take that away from any scholar. But my idea for me and my habit for me and my projection of that habit to my students is do your own work and then use AI to figure out why it's meaningful. Does that make sense? Okay, right. Oh, good. There are people in the room who are like, yeah, okay. Anyone else? Any other questions? Yes. We have an in-person question. So if there are any other online questions,
Yes.
we'll take that in a minute.
Not yet, not yet.
Okay.
I
Yes.
have two questions. The first one being about the research question.
Okay.
So like earlier, we talked about we have to be very specific with the scope and then the topic,
Yes.
right? But how specific is it now? Like, is that a limit to like how specific we can go to, or is it has to be as specific as we could?
Yes, so let me answer this question first, and then we'll get to your second question. The question is, how specific is too specific when it comes to a research question? You need a question that is analytical. So you don't, if you use the guidelines that we went over at the beginning, if you don't want a yes or no question, you want a question that asks why or how. You want a question that creates a population worthy of looking at, right? Studying. You want a time period that helps us to contextualize why that population is meaningful. And if necessary, you want to explain the geography or the layout of that population. So are they rural? Are they urban? Are they kids who, I think we talked about this earlier, are they young English language learners who came from a rural context into an urban context within the last year? Right? So that's not too specific. That's just specific enough to get you some really good data. Yeah. What's your second question?
The second question is about, getting approval from the community.
Mhm.
So what happened if it doesn't get approved, and can you resubmit, or like what to do after that?
Ooh, good question. So for ethics committees or IRB approval, institutional review board approval, if it doesn't get approved, what do you do next? Yeah, usually speaking, there is a detail in your proposal that they want you to fix. And so if you fix that, when I say fix, you address it in whatever way, whatever it was. Maybe the population, they're concerned about, your ability to talk to that population because it may be they are unfriendly to outsiders or something like that. How are you going to get inroads to that population without coercion or without undue influence? Or there are issues sometimes that can be worked out. So you just figure out how to address those issues in a meaningful way, and you usually will get your approval. But if it's something outlandish, like, I want to talk to every kindergartner in Ho Chi Minh City, yeah, that's not going to work. Yeah,
Right.
sure. Anyone? Oh, yes, one question over here. And I think this will be our last question. Mhm.
So, my question is, since the specificity of our research plan is also time bound, how far ahead or how late in that should we determine for our research plan? Because I'm afraid that, if I'm quite concerned that if we don't go back far enough in the timeline, or for example, if we just take data from the year 2020 to 2025, we might potentially need significant or relevant data that can serve our study.
Ooh.
And if we find out about such oversights along our research, do we make adjustments to our plans? If we make such adjustments, is it acceptable by the community that has granted us the permission to do the research at the beginning? And do you have there been
Whoa, slow down. Let me answer the first three questions.
All right.
We'll get to that last
We could not
one.
hear it clearly, so could you
Yes.
summarize a little bit before you answer?
Absolutely. So the question is about scope. So how far back do I need to go to get the information that I want? And if it seems like it's untimely, like, can I go past 2020 because there was some good data in 2019 kind of thing? And then what happens if I do kind of have to redirect and get more data? Do I have to go back to the institutional review board for more approval or a separate approval? Okay, that's all good questions. And the answer to the first part of the scope thing is you don't really want to have to do that. You really don't want to have to do that. You really should, at the beginning of your planning process, think about your population. You really need to know what it is you really want to do, and you need to be committed to that and sure about it. Now, if there is something that popped up, it might actually be an outlier. Do you include an outlier in your data? That's up to you. And as far as institutional review board approval, that's something you need to talk to the board about when you go through your first approval process, if you're using human research subjects. I think I might be able to find more data later. What should I do about that? They will tell you. You had another question though. You had a last question.
Okay, Melita, I'm afraid that this is the time to say goodbye. I'm sure that there are a lot of questions, but we need to end the webinars here because some participants begin to leave the webinars.
Yes,
Uh,
yes.
I think that we need to take at least one course or even two or three to master research methodology. But today, just in 2 hours and a half, you selected the best points, the most important points in research to present to participants. So it was a great webinars about research methods in social sciences and humanities. Thank you very much for that. And I also would like to say thanks to the team from American Center and American Spaces in Hanoi for your support, technical support. My thanks from SEAMEO RETRAC to participants who are attending in multi-purpose room in Hanoi, and the Zoom and also in YouTube Live. Thank you very much for working with us. We hope to welcome you back to future events, both in-person events and online events at SEAMEO RETRAC. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Melita.
Thank you, Lynn, and thank you, Chang. You are both so patient, and I will make sure that I give you access to all of those Google Forms, and yeah, hopefully we can talk a little bit about the data. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thầy cô nào muốn ở lại nghe về giới thiệu về e-library USA thì mời.